the rifle barrel pressed cold against Kestrel's temple as she stood frozen in her father's doorway. Watching the Apache warrior she loved more than her own breath slowly raise his hands in surrender. 3 men from Bramblewood had tracked Nahali to her cabin, and now her world was crumbling like autumn leaves. "Step away from the savage, Kestrel," growled Deputy Marshal Flint Cordwain, his weathered face twisted with hatred. "Your daddy spinning in his grave knowing his daughter's been consorting with murderous redskins." Nahali's dark eyes found hers across the small space that might as well have been an ocean. In them she saw not fear but a desperate love that matched her own, the same love that had bloomed secretly over stolen moments by the creek. Hidden embraces under starlight and whispered promises of a future that now seemed impossible. She whispered, her voice breaking. "He's done nothing wrong." "Nothing wrong?" spat Cordwain. "3 of our men are dead, girl. He's found scalped and mutilated near Copper Canyon." This here Apache scum was seen in the area. Kestrel's heart hammered. Against her ribs? She knew Nahali had been hunting near Copper Canyon, he'd told her so, just yesterday when they'd met by their secret place along Willow Creek. But she also knew, with every fiber of her being, that he was no killer of innocent men. The gentle hands that had traced her face in moonlight, the lips that had spoken of peace between their peoples, belonged to no murderer. "That wasn't him," she said, stepping protectively in front of Nahali, despite the gun trained on her. "I know this man." "He wouldn't. You don't know nothing about what these animals are capable of," interrupted Jeremiah Moss, the town's blacksmith, his massive hands gripping a Winchester. "They're all the same savages who'd slit your throat soon as look at you." Behind her, Kestrel felt Nahali's presence like a warm wind, steady and strong despite the mortal danger. She remembered their first meeting 6 months ago, when she'd found him wounded by a bear trap near her father's old hunting grounds. Against every teaching of her upbringing, she'd helped him, tending his wounds with her mother's herbal remedies. What had begun as Christian mercy had blossomed into something far more dangerous and beautiful. Kestrel Nahali spoke for the first time, his voice low and musical even in these dire circumstances. "You must step aside. These men have made their judgment." She turned to look at him then, memorizing every line of his face, the high cheekbones, the proud nose, the scar along his jaw from a childhood accident he'd once told her about while they lay together under summer stars. His long black hair was braided with the blue ribbon she'd given him, a secret token of her love. "No," she said firmly. "I won't let them take you for something you didn't do." Cordwain's laugh was harsh as winter wind. "Mighty touching, but this ain't some dime novel romance, girl. This here's justice. I'll move aside or I'll move you myself." The cabin fell silent, except for the tick of her father's old clock and the sound of her own ragged breathing. Outside, she could hear more horses approaching, the rest of Cordwain's posse, no doubt, come to witness what they believed would be justice, but what she knew would be murder. "I need to speak with him," Kestrel said, her voice finding strength she didn't know she possessed. "Alone. 5 minutes." "If you're so sure of his guilt, what harm could 5 minutes do?" Cordwain's eyes narrowed to slits. "You're trying to help him escape?" With 3 armed men watching, she gestured toward the windows where shadows moved, more men positioning themselves around her cabin. "Where would we go? I'm asking for 5 minutes to say goodbye to." She swallowed hard, the next words scraping her throat raw. "To someone who showed me kindness when I needed it most." The deputy marshal considered this, his gaze flicking between her face and Nahali's impassive expression. Finally he jerked, his head toward the others. "Outside, we're watching every window, every door. Try anything, and I'll put a bullet in both of you." When the door closed behind them, Kestrel turned to face the man who had become her whole world. Nahali stood perfectly still, but she could see the muscle jumping in his jaw, the barely controlled tension in his shoulders. "They will hang me," he said simply, as if discussing the weather. "Or perhaps they will not wait for a rope." "Don't," she whispered, crossing to him. Her hands found his face, thumbs tracing his cheekbones. "Don't talk like that. There has to be something we can do." He covered her hands with his own, and she felt the slight tremor there, the only sign of his fear. "Kestrel, my heart, you know as well as I that there is no justice for my people in your courts. These men want blood, and they will have it." Through the thin walls they could hear Cordwain barking orders, organizing his men. Soon, very soon, they would come back in, and this would all be over. "Run with me," she said desperately. "We'll go north to Canada. We can start over there, away from all this hatred." Nahali's smile was infinitely sad. "And make you an outlaw." 2. Force you to live forever looking over your shoulder, cut off from everything you know? He shook his head. "I love you too much for that." Hot tears spilled down her cheeks. "I'm supposed to just watch them take you? Live the rest of my life knowing I did nothing?" He pulled her against his chest then, and she breathed in the scent that had become home to her leather and sage and something indefinably him. His heartbeat thundered beneath her ear, strong and fierce, and she tried to memorize the sound. "Listen to me," he murmured into her hair. "What we had, what we shared, they cannot take that. It lives beyond their ropes, beyond their hatred. In the wind through the canyon, in the stars we wished upon, in every sunrise that remembers our love." She pulled back to look at him, and saw her own tears reflected in his dark eyes. "That's not enough. Not nearly enough. It has to be." His hands framed her face, thumbs brushing away her tears. "But there is something I need you to know. About that night, about what really happened at Copper Canyon." Her breath caught. "What?" "I was hunting, as I told you. I was not alone. There was a party of young warriors from my tri-boys, really filled with anger and whiskey. They had decided to raid the mining camp, to take revenge for the death of Chief Running Bear's grandson." Kestrel's eyes widened. Running Bear's grandson had been killed the week before, shot down in broad daylight by miners who claimed he was stealing. The boy had been 14 years old. "I tried to stop them," Nahali continued. "We fought. By the time I reached the camp, it was too late. The miners were dead, and the boys had fled back to the reservation." His voice grew heavy. "I buried the miners. I said prayers over them, as my grandmother taught me to do for all the dead, regardless of their blood. Then you're innocent in the eyes of your law. I am as guilty as if I had wielded the knife myself. I was there. I am Apache. That is all they need to know." The sound of boots on her porch steps cut through their moment like a blade. Kestrel's hands tightened desperately on Nahali's shirt, knowing these were the last precious seconds they would ever have together. "Tell me something," she whispered urgently. "Tell me something I can hold on to." His hands cupped her face, as if she were made of spun glass. "Do you remember the night of the meteor shower? When we lay in the meadow beyond the old oak?" She nodded. Throat too tight for words. "You asked me what my name meant. I told you it was wind that brings rain to the desert. But that was not the whole truth." His thumb traced her lower lip, a touch so tender it broke her heart anew. "Among my people, names carry medicine power. My full name is Nahaliatsi Chaha, which means the wind that brings life to places that have forgotten how to live. And you did," she breathed. "You brought life to me. As you brought the sun to my darkness, Fireflower." He used the Apache name he'd given her, the one he whispered when they made love under the stars. "That is who you are, the flame that burns away sorrow, the light that guides lost souls home." The door burst open, and Cordwain filled the frame, his face flushed with impatience and liquor. "Time's up, lovebirds." Nahali stepped protectively in front of Kestrel, but she moved beside him, taking his hand openly for the first time in front of others. "Let them see. Let them know that love had bloomed here, real and fierce and unashamed." "Marshal Cordwain," she said, surprised by the steadiness of her own voice. "Before you take him, there's something you should know. Nothing that Apache can say will change his fate. Not him. Me." She lifted her chin, drawing on reserves of courage she'd inherited from her pioneer grandmother. "I know who really killed those miners." The room fell silent. Cordwain's eyes narrowed dangerously. "What kind of game you playing, girl?" "No game. I saw them." The lie came easily, fueled by desperate love. "3 Apache boys, maybe 16 or 17 years old. They rode past my cabin the night before the killings, heading toward Copper Canyon. I saw their faces clearly in the moonlight. Lying, but uncertainty flickered in Cordwain's eyes. "Check the burial site," she continued, improvising frantically. "You'll find that the miners were buried according to Apache custom, their faces turned toward the rising sun. Sage burned over their graves. Would a killer take time to honor the dead? Or would someone who tried to stop the killing, who arrived too late, show such respect? She felt Nahali's hand tighten on hers, silent warning not to risk herself this way. Behind Cordwain, Jeremiah Moss shifted uncomfortably. She might have a point, Flint. I heard tell that Apache don't bury their enemies with honor rites. There's more, Kestrel pressed on, her mind racing. The tracks you followed here they're from yesterday, when Nahali came to help me repair my roof. You can see the ladder still propped against the house. Check with Mrs. Pemberton at the General. Storchet saw us working together in broad daylight. It was another lie. It's a plausible one. Mrs. Pemberton was nearly blind and might well confirm the story if asked. Being kind-hearted and fond of Kestrel, Cordwain's jaw worked furiously. Around him, his men exchanged uncertain glances. Bloodlust that had driven them here was cooling in the face of doubt. Even if that's true, Cordwain said finally, he's still Apache. Still the enemy. The enemy of whom? Kestrel's voice rang with sudden fury. Frightened men who see monsters where there are only people, but a town so twisted by hatred that they'd hang an innocent man rather than admit they might be wrong. She released Nahali's hand and stepped forward, facing down the deputy marshal with blazing eyes. My father died fighting for this country's promise that all men are created equal. Don't dishonor his memory by perverting justice into vengeance. Standoff stretched taut as a bowstring. Outside, more voices joined the crowd. Townspeople drawn by the commotion, women and children among them. Through the window, Kestrel could see familiar faces painted with curiosity and concern. Then a new voice cut through the tension. Marshal Cordwain. The voice belonged to Reverend Micah Thornfield, the weathered preacher who had baptized Kestrel. As a child, pushed through the crowd on her porch, his usually gentle face stern with purpose. What is the meaning of this gathering? Church business, Reverend Cordwain replied, but his conviction had wavered. We're dealing with a murderer. Thornfield stepped into the cabin, his keen blue eyes taking in the scene, the drawn weapons. Kestrel's tear-stained face, Nahali standing proud and unbroken despite his circumstances. The old preacher had seen enough injustice in his 70 years to recognize it instantly. And what evidence do you have of this man's guilt? Thornfield asked quietly. He's Apache, ain't he? Moss interjected. His kind killed those miners, his kind. The Reverend's voice carried the steel that had once faced down claim jumpers and cattle rustlers in his younger days. I seem to recall another man who was condemned by association, hung on a cross between two thieves, judged guilty by those who feared what they didn't understand. Don't you dare compare some heathen savage to our Lord, Cordwain snarled, and don't you dare twist God's justice into your own hatred, Thornfield shot back. I've known Kestrel Wyndham since she was knee-high to a grasshopper, and if she says this man is innocent, that carries weight with me. Behind the preacher, more voices rose from the crowd outside. Kestrel caught fragments, some calling for justice, others questioning whether they had the right man. The mob's certainty was fracturing, and with it, there'd be loosest tensing the shift. Kestrel pressed her advantage. Reverend Thornfield is right. You have no proof, only suspicion and prejudice. Would you hang a man on that? The tracks Cordwain. Began led here because he's been helping me with chores, she interrupted, as any Christian neighbor might do. Mrs. Aberdeen from the Mercantile has seen him carrying supplies to my cabin. Mr. Garrett has watched him chopping wood. Half this town has witnessed his kindness, and you'd condemn him for it. It was a desperate gamble, naming people who might or might not support her story, but desperation made her bold. She saw doubt creeping into more faces, the crowd's mood shifting like weather before a storm. Nah, Hal spoke for the first time since Thornfield's arrival, his voice calm and dignified. Reverend, I thank you for your words, but I will not hide behind lies, even well-meant ones. He looked directly at Cordwain. I was at Copper Canyon that night. I did not kill your miners, but I could not save them either. If that makes me guilty in your eyes, so be it. Nahali, no, Kestrel started, but he silenced her with a look. I will not have the woman I love become a liar for my sake, he said simply. Truth is the only thing we have that they cannot take. The admission hit the room like a physical blow. Several of Cordwain's men stepped back instinctively, recognizing the honor in Nahali's words, even as they struggled with their prejudices. Thornfield studied the Apache warrior with new interest. "You speak of love, son. What does that mean to you?" Nahali's gaze found Kestrel's, and in his eyes she saw all the tenderness of their stolen moments together. "It means wanting someone's happiness more than your own life. It means seeing past the color of skin to the color of spirit. It means knowing that hatred is a sickness, and only love can heal it." Pretty words from a savage, Cordwain spat, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. "Are they savage words, Marshal?" Thornfield asked. "Or are they perhaps the wisest words spoken in this room today?" The crowd outside had grown quiet, straining to hear every word through the open door and windows. In that silence, Kestrel heard something she hadn't dared hope for, the sound of minds beginning to change, of hearts softening despite years, of hardened prejudice. But she also heard something else, the distant thunder of approaching horses, riding hard. Whoever was coming was in a hurry. That could mean anything. The approaching riders burst into view with a thunder of hoofbeats and a cloud of dust that made the crowd scatter. Leading them was Sheriff Augustus Crane, his badge glinting in the late afternoon sun, followed by two Apache men Kestrel didn't recognize, and a young white man she vaguely remembered from the mining camps. Crane dismounted with the fluid grace of a man who'd spent more years in the saddle than on foot. His weathered face, grim but purposeful. "Marshal Cordwain," he called out, his voice carrying the authority of 20 years keeping peace in this territory. "Stand down your men. Sharif, we got the killer right here." "No, you don't." Crane pushed through the crowd with one of the Apache men beside him. "This here is Joseph Standing Wolf, Chief Running Bear's nephew. Tell them what you told me, Joseph." The Apache man stepped forward, his young face marked with shame and sorrow. His English was careful but clear. 3 nights ago, my cousin Windwalker led a war party against the miners at Copper Canyon. I was with them. We ... We let our grief overcome our wisdom." Murmur rippled through the crowd. Cordwain's face went red, then white. "That don't mean this one ain't involved." "It means exactly that," Crane interrupted. "Because Windwalker and his boys are sitting in my jail right now, having turned themselves in yesterday morning. Couldn't live with what they'd done." He gestured to the young white man who'd ridden with him. "And this here is Tommy Fletcher. Survived the attack by playing dead. Tommy, tell these folks what you saw." Fletcher, barely more than a boy himself, stepped forward nervously. "There were 4 of them that attacked us. It's young ones, maybe my age. But there was another Apache there, to older, trying to stop them. He fought with them, tried to pull them off us." Lori's voice strengthened as he continued. After the killing stopped, this older Apache, he helped me. Gave me water, bandaged my wounds, told me to stay quiet until they were gone. Then he buried my friends proper, like said words over them in his own language. The silence that followed was profound. Even Cordwain seemed stunned by this revelation. That Apache, Fletcher continued, his eyes finding Nahali's, had a blue ribbon in his hair, just like that one there. Kestrel's heart soared, even as tears streamed down her face. The ribbon, her ribbon, the one she'd given Nahali as a token of her love, had become proof of his innocence, evidence of his honor. "So, you see," Sheriff Crane said, his voice cutting through the shocked quiet, "this man ain't no killer. He's the reason young Tommy here is still breathing. He's the reason those dead miners got a proper burial instead of being left for the buzzards." Cordwain's shoulders sagged as if a great weight had settled on them. Round him, his posse looked anywhere but at Nahali, shame replacing bloodlust on their faces. But the sheriff wasn't finished. "There's more. Joseph here has something else to tell you." Standing Wolf spoke again, his voice heavy with emotion. "The older Apache, one who tried to stop Usias, is known to our people as a peacemaker. He speaks for those who believe the old ways of war must end. He has enemies among the young warriors because he preaches cooperation with the white settlements." He paused, gathering himself. "My uncle, Chief Running Bear, wishes to meet with the leaders of Bramblewood. He wants to discuss peace between our peoples." "Peace," Moss echoed incredulously. Peace, Crane confirmed. Not just absence of war, but cooperation, trade, shared use of the land. He looked directly at Kestrel and Nahali. Seems to me some folks have already figured out that different doesn't mean enemy. The crowd began to murmur, voices mixing hope with skepticism, curiosity with fear. Change never came easy to people set in their ways, but the seed was planted. Now Reverend Thornfield stepped forward, his voice carrying clearly. Sheriff Crane, I move that this man be formally cleared of all charges and offered the town's apology for this grievous misunderstanding. Seconded, came a voice from the crowd. Then another, and another. Cordwain holstered his weapon slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. We were wrong, the evidence pointed. He trailed off, unable to find words for what had nearly happened. Nahali stepped forward then, his dignity intact, despite all he'd endured. Marshal Cordwain, you acted on what you believed to be true. Hatred blinds us all sometimes. What matters now is that truth has prevailed. The grace in his words, the forgiveness offered to men who had come to kill him, rippled through the crowd like a stone dropped in still water. Kestrel saw faces change, saw prejudice wrestle with newfound respect. Sheriff. Crane nodded approvingly. Well said. Now, I think we've all had enough excitement for one day. Why don't you folks head on home and let these two have some peace? As the crowd dispersed, voices buzzing with the day's revelations, Kestrel found herself alone with Nahali. For the second time, but how different this moment was from the first. Where before they had faced certain death, now they stood in the golden light of late afternoon, free and vindicated, surrounded by the possibility of a future together. Can I hold you? Nahali asked softly, echoing the desperate question that had hung unspoken between them throughout their ordeal. Instead of answering, she stepped into his arms, feeling herself come home. They held each other in the doorway of her cabin, not caring who might see, no longer needing to hide their love in shadows and secret places. I thought I'd lost you, she whispered against his chest. You never could, he replied, his lips brushing. Her hair, what we have transcends death itself, fire, flower. They could have hanged me from the highest tree, and still I would have found a way back to you. Behind them, Sheriff Crane cleared his throat gently. Hate to interrupt, but there's more we need to discuss. They turned, reluctant to break their embrace, but knowing duty called. Crane stood with Joseph Standing Wolf, both men's faces serious, but kind. Chief Running Bear has asked me to extend a formal invitation, Standing Wolf said. He wishes you both to come to our camp tomorrow, to speak with the tribal council about peace between our peoples. Kestrel blinked in surprise. Both of us. The chief has heard of your courage today, of how you stood between Nahali and death, Crane explained. Word travels fast in these parts. He sees in you the kind of bridge builder this territory needs. Exactly would this involve? She asked. Practical concerns warring with excitement. Nahali squeezed her hand reassuringly. The chief wishes to establish formal agreements for trade, for shared hunting grounds, for peaceful resolution of disputes. He believes that understanding between our peoples must begin with individuals who already understand each other. Like us, she breathed, beginning to see the larger picture. Exactly like you, Standing Wolf confirmed. You have proven today that love can overcome hatred, that truth is stronger than prejudice. The chief wishes to build on that foundation. Sheriff Crane leaned against the porch railing, his expression thoughtful. Won't be easy. There's still plenty of folks on both sides who prefer the old ways of mistrust and violence. You'd be taking on a big responsibility. Kestrel looked at Nahali, seeing her own excitement reflected in his dark eyes. They had found each other across the divide of two cultures. Perhaps they could help others find their way across as well. What would happen to us personally, she asked. I mean, if we're working as ambassadors or whatever, would we... could we marry? Nahali finished her thought, his voice soft with hope. Standing Wolf smiled for the first time since his arrival. Among the Apache, marriage is a ceremony of the heart recognized by community acceptance. If the tribal council accepts you, Kestrel, as they have already accepted Nahali, your union would be blessed by our people. And legally? Crane added, Well, there's been talk in the territorial legislature about changing some of the laws regarding marriage between whites and Indians, especially in cases where it serves the cause of peace. Can't promise anything definite, but times are changing. Through the cabin windows, the last light of day painted everything golden, the simple furniture her father had made. The dried herbs hanging from the rafters, the small space that had been her whole world until Nahali had shown her how vast love could be. "I need to ask you something," she said, turning to face Nahali fully. "If we do this, if we become peacemakers, bridge builders between our peoples, it means our life together will never be completely private. We'll always be symbols, examples, watched and judged. Are you prepared for that?" His hands cupped her face with infinite tenderness. "Fireflower, I would walk through the fires of hell itself if it meant spending my life beside you. Public scrutiny is a small price to pay for. The privilege of building a future where other couples like us don't have to hide their love? Then yes," she said, her voice ringing with conviction. "Yes, we'll come to meet with Chief Running Bear. Yes, we'll work for peace between our peoples. And yes." She took his hands in hers, speaking the words that had lived in her heart. "For months, yes, I'll marry you, Nahaliatsi Chaha." Wind that brings life to forgotten places. Standing Wolf let out a whoop of joy that would have done his warrior ancestors proud. Sheriff Crane grinned and shook his head in amazement. "Well, I'll be damned," the sheriff said. "Pardon my French, but this has been the strangest day of my career, and that's saying something." 6 months later, as autumn painted the cottonwoods gold and crimson along Willow Creek, Kestrel stood before the combined assembly of Bramblewood townspeople and Apache tribal members, her hand in Nahali's as Reverend Thornfield and Chief Running Bear jointly performed a ceremony that would have been unthinkable a year ago. She wore a dress of soft deerskin decorated with beadwork that told the story of their love-blue ribbons, like the one that had saved Nahali's life. White flowers. For the purity of their intentions, and red symbols representing the courage they'd shown in facing down hatred. Nahali wore traditional Apache wedding attire, but around his neck hung a silver cross that had belonged to her father, symbol of the bridge they were building between worlds. "Do you, Kestrel Wyndham, take this man to be your husband, to stand with him as partners in love and life, through whatever trials and joys may come?" Reverend Thornfield's voice carried clearly across the meadow where they'd once lain together counting shooting stars. "I do," she said, her voice strong and sure. "With all my heart, I do." Chief Running Bear, resplendent in ceremonial dress, spoke in Apache, then translated, "Do you, Nahaliatsu Chaha, promise to honor this woman as the other half of your spirit, to protect and cherish her as long as grass grows and water flows?" "I promise," Nahali replied in both Apache and English. "She is the fire that lights my darkness, the wind that fills my sails. I will love her beyond this life and into whatever comes after." The crowd that had once come for a lynching now erupted in cheers of celebration. Sheriff Crane whistled through his teeth. Mrs. Pemberton from the general store wiped tears from her eyes. And even Deputy Marshal Cordwain, who had spent the past months learning to see past his prejudices, applauded with genuine warmth. As they kissed to seal their union, the setting sun painted the sky in shades of gold and rose, as if nature itself blessed their love. When they broke apart, breathless and glowing, Chief Running Bear raised his hands for attention. "Let this union be a symbol," the chief declared, his weathered voice carrying the wisdom of his years. "Let it remind us that love knows no boundaries, of blood or tribe, and that peace grows strongest when planted in the soil of understanding." Reverend Thornfield nodded agreement. "From this day forward, may Bramblewood and the Apache Nation work together as neighbors, as friends, as one people sharing this beautiful land." The celebration that followed lasted long into the night. Apache drums mixed with fiddle music, traditional, native foods shared table space with pioneer recipes, and children from both communities played together. Under strings of lanterns hung between the trees, as the night deepened and the party continued around them, Kestrel and Nahali slipped away to their special place by the creek, The same moon that had witnessed their first stolen kisses now blessed their wedding night. And the water sang the same ancient song of love triumphant. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked, curled against his side as they lay on the blanket dade. "Spread beneath the stars? It's giving up the warrior's path for peace?" "Never," he replied without hesitation. "The greatest victory is not in defeating your enemies, but in turning them into friends. The strongest medicine is not in war, but in love that heals old wounds." She traced patterns on his chest, thinking of all they'd accomplished together. The trading post they'd established had become a meeting place where Apache craftspeople sold their wares to settlers, while farmers shared their knowledge of new crops with tribal agricultural experts. The school they'd founded taught Apache children English, while settler children learned about native customs and traditions. Most importantly, they'd proven that love could indeed conquer hatred, that understanding could bridge any divide. "What do you think our children will say about all this someday?" she mused. "They will say their parents were brave enough to love when the world told them to hate," Nahali replied, his hand settling protectively over her still flat belly where their first child was already growing. "They will say, love wrote history." Above them, a shooting star traced silver fire across the velvet sky. They made the same wish they'd made months ago in this very spot for a future where love conquered all, where children of all colors could play together without fear, where peace grew like wildflowers across the land. Their wish, like their love, had already begun to come true. As they held each other under the vast western sky, Kestrel thought of the question that had started it all. "Can I hold you?" The Apache had whispered it, thinking it might be goodbye. Instead, it had become hello to a lifetime of holding each other, building something beautiful and lasting from the ashes of ancient hatreds. Love, it turned out, was the strongest medicine of all, and in the little town of Bramblewood, nestled in the shadow of the mountains where two cultures had learned to become one, their love story became legend-proof that even in the darkest times, even when all seems lost, love finds a way to triumph. The wind through the canyon still carries their story, whispering to new lovers of the Apache warrior and the pioneer, a woman who dared to love across the divide, who held each other not in farewell, but in the promise of forever.